Chris from Make Everything, and I'm exhausted. Hey, I'm Chris from Make Everything, and today we're making 5 huge, portable, rolling hedges. Check it out.
Okay, so the start of this project involved a huge run to the home center. I just buy a lot of material at Home Depot when I have to do something like this that involves kind of a lot of sort of average material. So this is all 1/2 inch OSB wafer board. It's used for sheathing traditionally, and these planters that I'm making are going to be painted and then covered in this, the fake Bosch material. So to keep the cost down and to keep them light, I use the OSB. Now I'm using one of these homemade skill saw rip fences that I'm sure you've seen other woodworkers use. They're really great. Mine is made out of 2 pieces of 1/2 inch MDF. There's a bunch of tutorials online about how to make these, but with the trade-off of having a shallower depth of cut, they really get you a nice straight line. And I'm using a battery-powered skill saw from Milwaukee, and it really just makes this process of breaking down this material a lot faster and easier. And you'll see here, normally I would use clamps to hold this down, but I'm trying to get this project done quickly. I don't have a lot of time. I only have a few days to get all these things finished. So I'm just screwing these down right to the material and running it across and cutting a few boards at a time. And once all the material is broken down, I put it on the A-frame. It's a drywall cart. Basically just muscle it into the shop and start to continue the process. Bringing in all my material, I've got about 40 2x2s and about 20 1x3s that are pine. So all this stuff has to get broken down and cut to length. And I go over to my miter saw station, and again, I like to screw work stops down directly to my miter saw station. I know some people use clamps, and people will probably scoff at the fact that I'm putting screws into my miter saw deck, but it's just the best way that works for me, and it's quick. Everything's made out of plywood in my shop for a reason, so it can all be replaced. My original plan here was to use 18 gauge staples and also screws to sort of glue and staple and everything together, but the staples didn't really want to go that deep, so I just decided to switch just to using screws. And I'm using a Milwaukee collated screw gun, traditionally made for drywall, but they work really great with plywood and pine. So I'm using 1 5/8 screws, and I'm gluing everything. And throughout this project, I put about 900 screws all together. The box of screws that I had bought was 1,000, and I have less than 100 left. So this project took a huge amount of screws. It also used a huge amount of material, but it's making 5 of anything takes a lot of time and a lot of material. So I'm basically just building boxes, framing the inside, and then going from there. So at this point, one of them was built, and then just for time purposes, I'm going to rush through the other 4. The problem that I was having, though, is that I hadn't put the wheels on these yet. The Home Depot didn't have the casters that I wanted to use on this project, so I ordered some online. The next day when they arrived, I put everything on. It would have been nice to have the casters when I started, because moving these things around without wheels is a bit of a pain. They're pretty heavy. So it's important to position casters the correct way when you're doing a project like this that's so narrow and wants to tip. So caster bases are usually a rectangle, and you're going to want to orient the rectangle so that it's parallel with the long side. So I'm just making sure that I do that, and I'm using 1 5/8 screws, and I'm making sure that they hit into some of the 2x2 framing. Now the design of these planters has basically a wooden planter on the bottom. The purpose is so that they look like a boxwood plant in a planter. So I am going to apply 1x3 to the outside and make basically panels with wainscoting inside, and that's what's going to show as the planter. So for anything like this where I have to do a bunch of gang cutting, I want to make sure I make up a sample that's going to definitely fit, because once I cut all that material, it's cut. If I make a mistake in the beginning, then I'll waste everything. So once I make those 2 panels and I know they're going to get around the corner, I just do a little bit of math, figure out exactly what I need. I just start cutting up my 1x material. Again, I do a lot of gang cutting on my miter saw, and some people are against that, say it's not safe. I think that with experience, you get a little bit of room to do stuff like this and to cut 5 1x3s at once. And I didn't have any problems with this. It's just about kind of taking your time with the cut, but making sure that you're getting as much material removed and as much material broken down as quickly as possible. So once I get my cuts set up, I just label the piles, because there's a 12-inch size and a 13-inch size, and I want to make sure I don't mix them up. And now I'm just setting up a dado stack so that I can do the rabbet cut in the back of these panels. So I want the wainscoting to recess completely inside the panels, because I don't want to build up the sidewalls any deeper than I have to. So I set up about a 1/4 inch dado stack and make a sacrificial fence out of some 1x3 scrap, so that my dado blade can run right up against the fence and I can just get this nice rabbet off the side. And what I'm doing with the long pieces is diving them into the blade and picking them up before they get to the end, so that they have a nice recess, something that you'd normally do with a router, but it's easier with the dado stack. And I decided, in order to keep these things nice and rigid and just make sure they didn't fall apart, to Craig jig all the face frames together. Normally you'd use 2 pocket screws on something like this, but again, I'm trying to get these done quickly, and they're also going to be face nailed right to the boxes, so I'm doing 1 pocket screw per side on all the pieces to make the face frames. I set up a little bit of dust collection. It didn't work great, but it helped a little bit with some of the dust from the pocket holes that I was drilling. So I like to set up a stop block on my table whenever I'm putting together face frames, just something to push against so you get a nice contact. My table's made out of plywood, so I just screw something down and start putting in the pocket screws. Again, any process that involves making 5 of anything it's a little boring, and it's hard to stay focused, but I like the challenge of trying to figure out efficient ways to do a project like this. So with the 5 boxes I made, each one of them had to have 4 panels, so that's 20 panels, and to get all that stuff done and make them all the same is a fun challenge every once in a while. So now that the face frames are done, it starts to rip down the panels, and I'm just sort of gang ripping the sheets down to a more manageable size, and then everything's going to be the same height, so that's nice. And then I can just cut down the lengths with the miter saw and start putting the stuff in. Now here I am going to use 18 gauge staples. They're 5/8 of an inch. The wainscoting is a 1/4 inch thick, so I'm going to glue and staple everything. And when I was cutting everything, I made sure that the panels would have the same orientation on every section, so I cut the sides off so that they would always have the same alignment, just so that they would look nice. Wasn't really necessary, just kind of something that I wanted to do for myself. And just clean out a little bit of the glue squeeze out. And what I decided to do here was assemble 3 of the sides of each planter, and I did these with glue and then 1.5 inch long 18 gauge brad nails. So now that that's done, I can nail these U-shaped planters to the boxes. And the reason I'm doing this is because the back side of each planter has to have hinges on it so that it can open. And these are for a party rental, tent renting company, and they are going to need to put sandbags in the bottom of these to keep them from tipping if they do an outdoor event. So the purpose here was to secure the face with brad nails, cut out 2 holes in the back for sandbags, and then attach the back panel with hinges so that it looks continuous when it's all closed up. but it actually can be open. So again, just running through the process now, just attaching things, cutting holes, putting in screws. And here was sort of a little accident that came about with this project. The client had told me that they needed to be a certain height to fit inside a box truck, but the height actually was shorter than he originally said. So I had to rip 5 inches off the top of every single one of these boxes. So what I did just there was I made a rip fence for my skill saw. Again, I'm putting some screws through the table of my skill saw and just making a little rip fence out of 2x and ripping these down. It worked really well. I lost probably an hour and a half cutting the tops off of these, but it could have definitely taken longer. So I was happy that it, didn't eat up too much of the day. And now it's time to paint. I'm priming everything with a interior white paint. I keep a 5-gallon bucket of white paint in the shop just for, painting the walls or touching up something. So just kind of dipping into that and sort of priming everything that's raw wood. And then continuing with all these, they are all going to get primed. And then I'll go back and paint them with a finish paint. I hate painting. If I could never do anything again, it would be painting. So I mixed up this really dark green paint at the local hardware store and just painted everything green so that when I put the greenery on there, you don't see any of the plywood. So the plywood boxes got 1 coat of green, and then the bases got a second coat after that first initial sort of primer coat of a semi-gloss white, and it definitely cleaned everything up, made sure there were no knots showing through, and I got any of the green paint that might have been on there. And I also attached these eye hooks to the bottom of the hinged panel so that they could close up nice and tight. And this was super difficult to do by myself. I tried to lean the boxes against the table, and then they would roll out on me, and it was a challenge. But once that was done, it was time to apply the greenery. These are 9x9 panels. They're supposed to look like boxwood, and they went on pretty easily. They're kind of a plastic underneath the plant material. So I was using 5/16 T50 staples. This is a DeWalt staple gun. It was definitely labor intensive to put these on. Took much longer than I expected, because I wanted them to look continuous and make sure there weren't any gaps and try and hide the corners. So it was definitely a process that I kind of wasn't expecting how long it was going to take me to put the grass on, the bush material. So eventually I did have to call in some help because the deadline was fast approaching and I really just didn't have time to get this all done. So at a certain point, my girlfriend Michelle shows up and I run out to the hardware store and grab a second stapler and we, tackle it together. The big challenge here was closing everything up, closing up all the corners, making everything look nice, not showing too many staples. It's definitely a lot of work.
One eternity later.
And that's it. These 5 planters are done. It was a challenge to get these done in the time frame, but I'm really happy with how they came out. They roll really easy and they look nice, and they're going to make a great backdrop for weddings and other events.
Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. If you like this video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more projects like this and whatever I'm up to in the shop, hit the subscribe button. Again, I'm Chris Zepp from Make Everything. We'll see you on the next video.